following podcast contains mature language and discussions that are not suitable for younger audiences. The opinions voiced in this podcast are our own. We are not experts on the topic we present, but have conducted our own research. Listener discretion is advised. We have all heard about or have seen Canada's breathtaking wilderness, thickly packed forests, towering mountain ranges, and beautiful turquoise rivers. This week's story takes us to the Nahanni Valley, a place that many of you have never heard of before, but is no exception to the beauty of Canadian wilderness. Situated in the Northwest Territories, the national park consists of forests, waterfalls, lakes, rivers, and 4 deep canyons. However, the beauty of this place is quite deceiving. The Nahanni Valley has a darker side. A side so full of unexplained deaths and disappearances, it has been named as Canada's most mysterious and cursed national park. Based on a string of decapitations that began in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it earned the name Valley of the Headless Men. Does this place harbor a dark secret that people have fallen victim to, or is there a more logical explanation? This is the Strange and Undecided podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Strange and Undecided podcast. I'm your host, Jarrett, joined by my co-host.
I am your co-host, Patrick.
Welcome back, everyone.
Hello, people. Welcome back.
So this week, we're taking you to the Northwest Territories, to the Nahanni Valley National Park. Have you heard of this place before today?
Absolutely not. Has anybody been to the Northwest Territories? Let me answer for you. Nobody's been to the Northwest Territories.
It's not a very common place, as we'll see. So with that being said, let's get into the story. Located in the Decho region of the Northwest Territories, Canada, lies the Nahanni National Park. The park is incredibly remote, as the Northwest Territories only has a total population of around 45,000. Do not be fooled by the fact it is called a national park. For the most experienced hiker, it is a very dangerous place and is virtually inaccessible. It is such a captivating and unique place that it was made a World Heritage Site in 1978 by UNESCO, or the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. In terms of the geography, the park's focal point is the South Nahanni River. This river carves through 4 distinct canyons which reach a maximum depth of 1,000 meters or 3,300 feet. The canyons are named 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th.
Boring.
To be perfectly honest, I thought a place with this much mystique and being really, really far north, it would have more interesting names than 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th.
It sounds like streets in New York City.
And this place is anything but that. Besides the river and the canyons, there are a number of other landmarks that are equally as impressive. There is a mountain range located in the northwest boundary of the park called the Ragged Range. This mountain range has the highest peaks in the entire Northwest Territories and was formed over 100 million years ago by sedimentary rock being pushed from under the Earth's crust. Over time, the sedimentary rock has worn away to reveal granite towers, which is what can be seen today. Other landmarks include the Rabbit Kettle Hot Springs and tufa mounds. The hot springs precipitate minerals from the water onto the surface of whatever they flow over. The minerals harden, forming what is called a tufa mound. The Rabbit Kettle Tufa Mound is the largest in Canada, standing 30 meters tall and 60 meters wide, which is around 100 feet tall and 200 feet wide. Places like this are special to the Dean people, as they would look to it as a sign of good or bad luck. If the kettle was flowing, that equaled good luck, and if it was not flowing, bad luck. The South Nahanni River flows into the next prominent landmark, the Virginia Falls. The waterfall is a striking 92 meters or 300 feet tall and is split down the middle by an erosion-resistant pillar called Mason's Rock. For reference, Niagara Falls, the horseshoe on the Canadian side, is almost half the size of this waterfall. Looking at the history of the area, the name Nahanni is derived from the First Nations Dean people, I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, which translates to River of the Land of the Naha people. The land surrounding the Nahanni National Park was where the Dean people lived for thousands of years, but they were not the only ones. The Naha were a cannibalistic mountain-dwelling tribe that were said to be more warlike and would descend from the mountains and raid Dean villages. The Dean feared them, but wanted to fight back. Some Dean villagers climbed the mountain, wanting to raid one of the Naha settlements. When they arrived at one of the villages, the Naha people had disappeared without a trace, and they were never seen again. Where did these people go? The only evidence of their existence now is from stories that the Dean people tell. They claim that the land is cursed by evil and is haunted.
Is there artifacts of them living in the Nahanni Valley?
There's absolutely nothing.
Just the stories of the Dean people.
Exactly. It may just be a superstitious legend, but whether you believe in the supernatural or not, there definitely is something strange happening in the Nahanni Valley. The Naha tribe's mysterious disappearance came to light again when European settlers traveled through the area in search of gold. They conversed and traded with the Dean people and were warned about the land and told that it was cursed. Naturally, the settlers still ventured out into the wilderness.
Naive Europeans always venturing into the wilderness.
At this point in time, the Klondike gold rush of the Yukon was happening and people wanted a part of it. Settlers traveled from far and wide in hopes of finding gold and becoming rich. There were various routes taken to reach the Yukon, and some of these settlers tried to access it by traveling through the Nahanni Valley. Some of them also heard that they could find gold in the Nahanni Valley as well. Those who were not fortunate enough to strike it rich in the Yukon descended upon the Nahanni and began to search for gold in the many creeks that feed into the great South Nahanni River. As we'll soon find out, the allure to find gold led many people to their demise.
Greed, greed, greed. A tale as old as time. I mean, who goes and just treks out into the Canadian mountains back in this era when there was literally no infrastructure to do so? That's either big balls or very naive, like we said about the Europeans.
When the motivation is gold, I think people are willing to do pretty much anything.
What a crazy thing to do.
This lust for gold would be the catalyst for bringing out the darker side of the Nahanni Valley. In 1898, a group of 6 prospectors made their way into the Nahanni Valley in search of gold. Some time passed and they never returned from the area. It wouldn't be until years later that a hunter happened to stumble upon an old camp where he found a grisly scene. The remains of the prospectors had been found. What made the scene even more horrific was that the bodies all had their heads missing. The bodies were also clutching weapons like they were trying to defend themselves from something. This was a confusing sight. Had these people been attacked by something, or was there a more rational explanation? Sadly, there wasn't much attention in regards to these bodies being found, as the RCMP declared the deaths to be from exposure and that animals were the cause of why the heads were missing. Because of this, the story never gained any attention in the media and would have been forgotten if not for what happened next. In 1904, Willie, Frank, and Charlie McLeod caught wind of the potential for gold to be found in the Nahanni Valley. Packed with only basic gear, they traveled from Edmonton, Alberta to the Nahanni Valley, where they faced the unknown wilderness and all of its potential for gold. They traveled by boat and by foot and finally came upon a place aptly named Gold Creek. They began to sift the waters in Gold Creek, and as the saying goes, hard work pays off. They found gold. With their newfound treasure, they decided to pack their equipment and made their way by boat out of the valley. When traversing the rapids of the South Nahanni River, their boat capsized, causing them to lose their equipment as well as the gold.
Oh, imagine all the work.
Dead set on not returning empty-handed, they decided to salvage what they could of their boat and try to go back upstream and find more gold, and were ultimately unsuccessful. But it wouldn't end here. They decided at this point it would be safer to return home and better prepare for a new expedition the following year into the Nahanni Valley. However, one of the brothers, Charlie, was apprehensive to return and instead decided not to join his brothers on the trip. Frank and Willie wanted to bring another person with them, so they asked their friend Robert Weir, who was a Scottish engineer, to come with them. Somewhere between 1905 and 1906, the two McLeod brothers, as well as Robert Weir, set out from their home to the Nahanni Valley. They entered the valley and were never heard from again.
Lucky for the brother, eh?
Years had passed with no sign or word from the brothers. Rumors had spread that maybe they had found so much gold that maybe they started their lives somewhere else. Charlie began to get worried and decided to round up a search party and go find his brothers. In 1908, the search party stumbled upon a horrific scene. A small camp set up beside the river and two sets of remains, Frank and Willie. This was determined from some personal items found on the bodies. What was terrifying in this case was that both bodies were missing their heads, similar to the story of the 6 miners from 1898. Upon further investigation of the site, the search party determined that they were asleep when they were attacked. They seemed to have been caught by surprise, as one body was inside the tent, still partially covered by a blanket. The other body lay outside of the tent, reaching out towards a gun leaned up against a tree. The search party looked around the camp and in the surrounding woods and were not able to find the skulls. One interesting clue found at the campsite was a carving in a tree. The carving said, "We have found a fine prospect." More mysteriously, Robert Weir was nowhere to be found. Several months later, a partial skeleton was found a little ways up the river from the campsite. However, it was never able to be identified conclusively if it was Robert or not. Based on the events that transpired in the valley, the area where the brothers' bodies were found was named the Dead Man Valley, and the nearby creek called the Headless Creek.
I mean, it's better than Creek 1, 2, 3, 4.
No kidding. As soon as word spread about what had transpired in the valley, rumors began to run rampant. Who would decapitate two people and steal their heads? Some people thought that there could have been other prospectors in the valley that killed the McLeod brothers so they could steal their gold. The public mania over their deaths even led people to believe that there was a secret cache of gold in the Nahanni Valley, and it was dubbed the Canadian El Dorado. Others simply believed that their deaths were the cause of wild animals. Some even thought that the Naha had emerged and attacked the camp and left the headless corpses as a warning to other people attempting to prospect in the valley. Nobody knew what had actually happened, but the mystery kept getting deeper and deeper. Nils Asfeldt wrote a poem titled The McLeod Brothers 3, but I found the last part of this to be quite chilling. Quote, "Could it have been wild beast, a bear or wolverine, that killed Charlie's brothers and picked the bones clean? Whatever the truth, there's no doubt in my mind. Gold on the Nahanni is better left behind." Sometime in 1913, Swiss prospector Martin Jorgensen wanted to get a hold of some of the gold from the Nahanni Valley. He wasn't about to let some superstitious stories get in the way of him obtaining riches. He was so confident that he even made the treacherous trip into the Nahanni Valley by himself. And much like the people in the stories he ignored, he set up camp right by the river. It was a spot on the Flat River, which was close to 70 miles upstream of where the McLeod brothers had been found. Martin planned to stay in the Nahanni Valley throughout the winter, so he built himself a cabin where he would call home until he found what he was looking for.
Guy's a man's man.
Very dedicated. He also planned to meet up with some partners in the summer. He wasn't set up for too long before he ended up finding gold. He traveled back downstream and sent a letter to the people that he was going to meet up with in the summer, letting them know that he struck it rich. Naturally, they were very excited and couldn't wait until they could make the trip to join him.
It sounds like a person like this would be just happy living alone in nature anyway. Why need the gold?
Well, I think that was the motivator for everything that he was doing to begin with. So he would go to these lengths just to get his hands on gold.
For this guy, I feel like he's just doing it for the thrill of it. I feel like he wouldn't be fulfilled if he found that money. I think he's just having his best life, building cabins, trekking alone in the middle of nowhere, meeting up with some supposed friends in the summer.
Whether or not it was for the thrill or greed, it was about to come to an end. When the time finally came to meet up, Martin had not been heard from. Concerned about him and the gold,
Mostly the gold.
his partners waited for a couple of months before they decided to go looking for him. They hired a guide and made their way up to Flat River and tried to find out where Martin had set up camp based on the letter he had sent them. Good news was that they found the cabin. However, the bad news, it had been burned to a crisp. Lying on the ground next to the burnt remnants of the cabin was a body. The body was missing its head, and it was never recovered. Based on personal effects found on the body, it was determined to be Martin. The police were notified and traveled to the location to conduct an investigation. They were not able to tell the exact cause of death and chalked it up to animals taking the head away. Possibly to not cause mass hysteria, the police made absolutely no connection between this incident and the McLeod brothers incident that only happened 9 years prior. There was absolutely no explanation for why the cabin was burned down. Upon further inspection, there were also no signs of any gold found in the remnants of the cabin or around the area.
The burnt cabin, how do we know it wasn't caused by just a spark from his fire?
It could have very well been. However, it was strange that his body was found outside of the cabin on the ground. Despite the police sweeping this case under the rug, Martin's death spread like wildfire in the news and caused a sensation. At this point, people didn't care what the police had to say. People were being killed in the Nahanni Valley and being decapitated.
Imagine being one of these cops having to go up there to investigate. Probably took them like 6 days just to ride their horses up there. What year was this?
This was 1913.
Okay, 1913, forensic technology, non-existent. What else are you going to do as a cop? Yeah, it was probably just a bear. Let's forget about it.
Had greed led Martin to his demise? Maybe it was best to leave behind the gold of the Nahanni. In 1921, a prospector and animal trapper named John O'Brien decided to ignore the horrific events happening in the Nahanni Valley and set out with his partner to find the gold. John O'Brien ventured into the valley with high hopes of finding the legendary gold, and even set up camp close to where the McLeod brothers were discovered. He had set up traps along their journey, and they were scattered over a fairly large distance. When the two finally settled into their camp, they began searching the area and were successful in finding gold. After this, John wanted to check on his traps and told his partner that he would return in 9 days. The 9 days passed and there was no sign of John.
Would you trust me if that was us? Hey, Jarrett, I'll be back in 9 days.
Absolutely not. No. There's no reason why you wouldn't go together. Like, unless you're trying to make sure that your camp doesn't get overtaken, why would you ever go by yourself? This is the worst thing you can possibly do. Hey, let's go into the most treacherous area in Canada that has like all these weird things that are happening, but I'm just going to go off by myself. Yeah, no, not happening.
You need a bro for quests.
Yes. His partner, worried, left the camp in search of him and stumbled across the path of another prospector also searching for gold. He told him about what had happened, and the two of them began searching for John. I wasn't sure how long exactly, but eventually they did find John, but he wasn't alive. He was sitting in front of what used to be a campfire and was frozen solid. He looked as if he was instantly frozen, as the expression on his face was calm, and he was even holding a matchbook in his hand. Police were once again called to the scene and ruled out anything abnormal. To them, it was clear-cut. He simply froze to death.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense.
Police did note how it was very odd, the positioning of the body and how calm John appeared. Once again, another story that started with a search for gold and ended in death. In 1926, a woman named May Annie Lafferty, who preferred to go by Annie, wanted to join a hunting expedition planning to go through the Nahanni Valley. They set up camp one night and everything seemed normal until the following day. When the hunting crew woke that morning, Annie had disappeared. They weren't alarmed at first as they thought she might have wandered off to explore a bit and would come back shortly, but she never returned. When she didn't return, a portion of the hunting crew went out looking for her while the other part waited at the camp. It wasn't long before the search crew picked up her trail and followed it deeper into the woods. Looking at her tracks, it seemed she had picked up speed and was moving incredibly fast due to the large distance between each footstep. They had been following her trail for 9 days at this point, and they still hadn't found her. However, they kept seeing pieces of her clothing in shreds hanging from the trees, as if while she was running, she had ripped them off. The search party continued to follow her trail up the mountain now, and they began to wonder how someone could survive such a harsh environment completely naked. After 4 more days, they gave up searching for Annie and returned home to report the incident. Annie was never found. It wouldn't be until a number of months later that a man who went by Charlie reported to the police what he saw in the Nahanni Valley. Charlie told them that while he was out hunting, he had set up camp for the night near Flat River. He had fallen asleep and was awoken in the middle of the night by the sound of rocks hitting the water. The moon must have been bright enough that night because when he emerged from his tent, he was able to see what was making the noise. He spotted a naked woman running on all fours up the side of the cliff. The rocks hitting the water were due to her climbing and knocking them down. He could even see the expression on her face, and it sent chills through his body. Charlie said she had, quote, a rictus grin, like the expression was frozen on her features, and her eyes wide and wild, end quote. This was the last time Annie was ever seen. Police dismissed Charlie's account due to the fact that it was impossible for someone to survive naked in the mountains for days, let alone months. In her honor, the area where Annie disappeared was renamed to May Creek. For all we know, Annie could still be out there. As time went on, the number of deaths and disappearances lessened, but it did not end. One of the more chilling deaths occurred in 1945, where a miner from Ontario named Ernest Savard ventured into the Nahanni Valley. His body was found by Walter J. Tully and his 2 partners when they were out on an expedition in the Nahanni Valley. Ernest's body was in a sleeping bag, and once again, the head was missing and was never recovered. The police concluded that the reason he died was due to starvation, and he simply climbed into his sleeping bag, and his head was missing because the rest of his body was inside the sleeping bag and animals couldn't get to it. The final case I'm going to talk about is quite recent. In 2005, David Horsey and Frederick Hardesty were found dead close to the Nahanni National Park. They were staying at a friend's cabin located 125 kilometers northwest of Fort Simpson, which wasn't exactly far away from the park. The men were missing for almost a month before the bodies were found. Both of them were found outside, and David had died from hypothermia while Frederick died from drowning. The bodies were found a considerable distance away from the cabin. David was found 3.7 kilometers or 2.3 miles from the cabin in the bush, and Frederick was found floating in the North Nahanni River 20 kilometers or 12.5 miles away. The police determined that the deaths were due to exposure and drowning respectively and were not suspicious in any way. The families begged to differ and even called for the investigation to reopen. David's stepbrother Joseph was convinced something else had happened. He stated in an interview with CBC, quote, there were bullet shots all over the place, and there was a gunshot in the floor. The picture is bigger than just 2 guys, one who died of hypothermia and the other who died of drowning. There was something else that happened before all that came down, end quote.
Yeah, how do you just both die simultaneously in completely different ways?
Great question. So there's some really sketchy things with the investigation and why it was called to be reopened. When the search party came out to look for the bodies, they were allowed to go near the actual cabin and completely contaminated the crime scene. So the police said, yeah, we're not able to actually take forensic evidence from the crime scene because it's been contaminated by all these people. Currently, there are no updates to the case. While this story doesn't exactly come from the Nahanni Valley, it still has the same elements as the other stories. Mysterious deaths with no real explanation. So let's get into some of the existing theories as to what is happening in the Nahanni Valley. Number 1, these people are being murdered by other people in search for gold. So the first point I have here for this is many people are searching for gold and want to be the ones to bring the riches home, or they might want to steal gold from people who have it. Greed can lead people to commit some pretty horrific acts, as we know, and the wilderness is an isolated place where someone could get away with murder. As for the people's heads going missing, I thought about this one and maybe this theory might make sense to you. These people are bundled up in clothing and wraps and such, and the only part of their skin that's exposed to the air is their face. Could this be the reason the heads went missing? Animals could only access their head, much like the theory the police came up with for the Ontario miner Ernest, who was found in his sleeping bag. So what do you think of this theory?
Makes sense.
So the next theory was a mystical animal is killing these people. The Wahila, described as a large white wolf or dire wolf, is said to roam the Nahanni Valley. It is an ancient, massive wolf that is said to be the suspect in the Nahanni killings. Originating from Dean legend as well, the Nukluk is a creature that was reported to have been roaming the same time as the Wahila in the Nahanni Valley. The Nukluk is a small humanoid-like creature that wears nothing but a loincloth and carries a club around that may be responsible for killing these people. So, as for a mystical animal killing these people, there is a mystical-like quality of the woods, but personally, I don't think that there's an elusive mystical creature that's going after these people. However, the wildlife that is in there, I believe, could be like, have you ever seen a dire wolf before or heard of it?
No.
They are just massive wolves, like bigger than bears. So the Wahila was also described as being a bear dog. So just absolutely massive. I could see something like this, not mystical, but actually real, existing in this area because it's completely untouched by man for the most part. So maybe these animals are allowed to thrive in their environment much more compared to other areas in Canada.
Is this similar to like a Bigfoot idea?
I mean, Bigfoot was also one of the theories as well, that potentially Bigfoot lives in the Nahanni Valley and is killing these people.
Could be, but I don't think that's the case. Let's continue.
Number 3, UFO sightings have increased inside the Nahanni National Park over the years, as well as
that's
reports.
That's the one. Just stop that. This is the theory. This is what happened, guys. UFOs.
Okay, why?
UFOs, man.
So I couldn't really find a whole lot on this, but there has been speculations that because of how remote it is, that UFOs could be using it and operating in this area to avoid detection from the general population or more concentrated populations.
Man, I wish it was UFOs.
All right, and the fourth and final theory is that the Naha people may have not disappeared after all. They might still reside in the valleys and prey upon unsuspecting people who wander into their path. The Nahanni Valley is described as having many subterranean caves and caverns that are also completely unexplored. Maybe the Naha tribe lived there, or potentially something else like the Nukluk. So when I was reading further on this theory too, I also came across the hollow earth theory. Are you familiar with that at all?
No, Jarrett, what is the hollow earth theory?
So the hollow earth theory, from my understanding anyways, are you familiar with the book by Jules Verne called Journey to the Center of the Earth?
Did they make that into a movie?
Yes, they did. Yeah, they did.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it.
The premise is that there exists almost another place, like another planet almost, inside our current planet. And there's an entryway somewhere on Earth. So in this case, there has been speculation that the Nahanni National Park is the entryway into this kind of inner Earth, so to speak, and that there are species of animals and things that aren't from this world. And it's kind of like a veil that they pass between.
So is this like a physical world or like a metaphysical?
It's a physical world.
Seems pretty improbable to me, but why do people think that there is a Earth within the Earth?
There's a pretty cult-like following to this theory. So I feel like those people are very dead set on this place existing. There also was like a cult-like following to Journey to the Center of the Earth as well. They're called Vernians, I believe.
So if you're a Vernian and you're open to discussing your theories of the center of the Earth, then please email us at strangeandundecided@gmail.com.
So, in total, there have been over 40 people who have mysteriously died or gone missing in the incredibly isolated and remote Nahanni Valley. Despite the theories, this is a concrete fact that can't be denied. The conclusion? Nobody knows what happened, and it will forever remain a mystery. The only way to find out is to go yourself. So charter a private flight, head into the heart of the national park, and take in the beauty of the wilderness. Just be careful not to lose your head.
So, Jarrett, what do you think is the most plausible theory of all these mysterious deaths?
I'm going to say the first theory that I presented, which was that other people are murdering these people. I feel like greed in this case and the complete isolation and remoteness of the area, people feel like they can get away with it. And the fact that these people even went into this treacherous area to begin with just shows how motivated they are for gold.
Despite how vast like this area is, there's probably like some turf wars, some beefs.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, hey, you've picked a nugget off my claim.
And it led to physical confrontation for sure. I could definitely see that. People have been shot, people have been killed. But in the Nahanni Valley, it's just that much more remote compared to these other places. So you're less likely to be caught. So do you agree with that theory, or do you have another theory besides your UFOs?
Well, let me ask, was there like one guy who came out of that valley with like a hugely disproportionate amount of gold? And it's like, hey, how did Richard find so much gold in such a short amount of time?
As far as I know and from what I could find, there was nobody that exited the valley with gold whatsoever.
Ever?
Ever. If I'm wrong, please comment or send us an email at strangeandundecided@gmail.com. We would definitely like to hear from you. But as far as I could find, I didn't find any indication that anybody came out with masses of gold.
Well, sucks for anybody who went down there. At least they took in the views and probably lost a few brothers.
So what is your theory then? Or the theory that makes the most sense to you?
I don't think it can be narrowed down to one specific theory for every single case. I think it's probably a combination of multiple situations. Like, I'm sure some of them have been murdered in the greed stuff that we were mentioning.
Right.
I'm sure some of it was animals. Some of it was carelessness, probably some diseases and weird stuff like that.
The things that weirded me out more so were like the stories of Annie, for example, how she took off running into the woods and was never seen again. Like, what would cause somebody to go do that? Would that be just complete delirium?
Maybe that guy who claims that he saw Annie was the last man to see her alive.
Ooh, but that still doesn't explain why she ran off into the woods by herself, naked. I want to touch on the McLeod brothers a little bit now that you say that. I found it weird how Robert Weir was never found. So one of the theories that exists, and the one that makes sense to me, is that the McLeod brothers, because they wrote on that tree saying that they found gold, Robert Weir betrayed them and killed both of them and then took off with the gold.
Pretty shitty thing to do, but yeah, adds up.
It would make sense, I think anyways. And
they did find that body though that they couldn't identify as Weir.
True, but there's also been like many other people who have ventured into the Nahanni and have never been discovered. They've just simply disappeared. So that could be one of them too. But at the same time, I just found it very strange that he didn't pop up somewhere else with all this gold and have no attention.
What was the name of the dude who claimed to have seen Annie again?
His name was Charlie.
All right, so this Charlie guy comes up with this crazy story of this naked Annie, like scaling cliffs and running on all fours with a crazy grin on her face. It's like, what's the craziest thing you could come up with to relieve yourself of the guilt of murdering her?
Ooh, yeah, I could see that.
Let me think of something much more crazy so people will remember this weird story and not think I'm a suspect.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. That makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna go with that theory.
It kind of plays on people's natural morbid curiosity in the supernatural and the unknown.
Oh, for sure. And it also makes a better story.
Great story. Murders are boring.
Even when people are being decapitated?
Well, the fact that there was mysterious beheadings before this guy claimed to have seen Annie, he already knows people are playing into the hysteria of it. So he could just be making up the story, playing off of the weirdness of the valley already. Or maybe he's innocent and I apologize.
Well, that's the thing, is that we're never going to know what happened. It's only theory and speculation. That's it. But I'll ask you this. If you had the opportunity to go to this place, would you?
Yes, no doubt.
Just because of the beauty of the area and the remoteness?
Yeah, it's beautiful. I've seen the pictures of it.
Some of the articles that I posted in the show notes have a bunch of pictures in them. So if you open those, you'll be able to see what the Nahanni Valley looks like. But yeah, the place is magical in a sense, if that's an appropriate word. It doesn't even look like Canada.
Hang on, one thing that just came to mind. I saw like that article I read. It said the only way to access that valley is by plane.
Yep.
So how are these people getting in there?
These people were just walking.
Why can't we walk?
Because it'd be days.
So we could.
I feel like nowadays, because of advancements in technology and stuff, we're not as hardened as these people. These people are used to day in, day out hiking and physical labor, being outside.
We are soft.
It's unfortunate, but maybe it's best that nobody ever enter the Nahanni National Park. With that being said, that's going to end the show for the night. If you have any ideas or want your story featured on the show, please email us at strangeandundecided@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening.
And good night.